David Cameron has won a general election outright, and before the election, some of you may have seen on the news, he has also said that he will not contest another as Prime Minister. So this is his last shot at being the Prime Minister. So one of the dynamics that we'll see later in this Parliament, which will affect the government overall and will certainly affect public spending, is seeing who in the Conservative Party fancies being the next candidate at the 2020 general election. The Conservative government made a number of key commitments, one of which is going into Parliament today, is the commitment to have no tax rises over the course of this Parliament. They have committed to 3 more years of spending cuts, that's running up to the 27-18 financial year. £12 billion of those spending cuts, fairly famously, have not been specified. So details are sort of gradually starting to leak out about where those cuts might come. Some of you might have seen the other day in the news that £200 million was taken away from the Department of Health's budget for public health work with local government. There's also a commitment to an EU in-out referendum, which has obvious potential to affect businesses which don't purely operate in the UK or which recruit, importantly, from outside the UK. And I guess most pertinently for the purposes of today, a commitment to protect NHS spending, if not social care. So this election result, I think, was kind of unexpected by many people, one of whom is there. And it's obviously very difficult to see how the opposition didn't come into government. So can I just have a quick show of hands who saw the result of this general election coming? So hands up, like Jeremy, hands up if you saw this result coming. Okay, fair enough, that's good. I love the fact that we have an honest crowd, because the commentators didn't see it coming, the opinion pollsters didn't see it coming. We're in slightly unexpected territory, I think it's fair to say. And the man with his hands up before Christmas gave some interviews in the media in which he said he'd actually like to be re-elected to the health job. So that's really putting your hands up in quite a big way. Quick little bit of context. I'm sure you all know this, but one of the things that the Conservative government is not going to talk about, I reasonably confidently predict, is having a big piece of legislation on the NHS, because they tried that in their coalition with the Liberal Democrats, giving us the extremely entertaining 2012 Health and Social Care Act, ironically named Liberating the NHS. And the whole thrust of this, according to Andrew Lansley, you remember Andrew Lansley? The man who went up to the RCN and said, "I'm sorry if what I'm trying to do is not communicated itself." Yeah, so anyway, we're reducing bureaucracy. How do we reduce bureaucracy? Well, obviously we start off, we create the NHS England, the NHS Commissioning Board. That's the biggest quango anyone's created anywhere, ever. It costs about £4 billion a year to run NHS England, and NHS England on its specialised commissioning work spends almost £30 billion a year, so big reduction in bureaucracy right there. What else? How else do we reduce bureaucracy? We used to have 10 strategic health authorities, which were sort of the local offices, really, of the NHS. And so we replaced 10 of those by 31, big reduction in bureaucracy right there. And then, anybody remember primary care trusts? Anybody's heart sing when you think back to primary care trusts? No? Okay. But anyway, we had 150 of those, and we replaced 150 statutory commissioning organisations with 209. So, big reductions in bureaucracy, as well as adding 15 commissioning support units. So that was obviously, a major success. The other thing which obviously happened over the course of the last Parliament was we were seeking to address the deficit caused by the global financial crisis in 2007-8, and probably not by New Labour having spent a bit of money in schools and hospitals. Probably was caused by a global banking type of crisis, because bailing out banks is really expensive, and we all did it. Warm glow. So the NHS budget was protected. That was one of the commitments for the last Parliament. It was protected in real terms, and the work of Professor John Appleby, Chief Economist of the King's Fund, conclusively demonstrated it was protected only just. It was about 0.01% on average across the Parliament, and that was largely due to very low inflation. But anyway, that's the supply side. And what we all know is that there are two sides to every story. There's the supply side, and there's the demand side. And on the demand side, things are a bit more interesting because demographic change, we are becoming older, fatter population, and technological factors, the fantastic products that you guys in the room have to offer the NHS, generally agreed to drive developed world healthcare systems costs up by about 4% a year. That's a rough rule of thumb. Now, we're all very clever people in this room, and we know between 0.01% and 4%, there's a gap. The gap was referred to as the Nicholson Challenge in honour of Sir David Nicholson, former chief executive of the NHS during most of the last Parliament. And it was expressed, Ollie's going to touch on this later in his presentation, but it was expressed as the Nicholson Challenge, or quick quality improvement, productivity and prevention, innovation. Oh, terrible. And essentially that was about the NHS doing without £4 billion a year over every successive financial year of the last Parliament to, £4 billion a year it would have had our economy continued to function as it did prior to 2007. It didn't have, and it had to make do without that. And essentially, the studies of this have demonstrated that that was almost entirely achieved by wage freezes and by cuts in the national tariff that's paid for procedures. And, the NHS coped amazingly well during the last Parliament. I think we would have to say, in general, the NHS performed well. Richard Murray, Director of Policy of the King's Fund, formerly of the Department of Health, will face a financial crisis in 2015-16, if not before. I think many of you will know that the NHS is likely to post a deficit which, if it were reported completely accurately, which I'm not sure it will be, would be very nearly £2 billion. That's a lot of money in the Treasury. I'm not happy about that. So that was the Nicholson Challenge, and we're now on to the Stevens situation, I suppose. Simon Stevens took over in 2014 at NHS England, and Simon is a former NHS manager. He became the health policy advisor first to Frank Dobson, before he went on to work for Alan Milburn and then for Tony Blair in Number 10. David Nicholson is famously a former communist, and Simon Stevens a former Labour councillor in Lambeth, which is leading me to conclude that perhaps not in our children's lifetime, but in our children's lifetime, a former Liberal Democrat may possibly get the top job at NHS England. Simon went to work for the US insurance giant United Health for 10 years, and he's a very serious figure in health. I'm sure many of you already have seen his speeches, whether live or in webcasts. He's a very intellectually bright man, he's politically astute, and he's very successful, and David Cameron and George Osborne like him. They feel they can do business with him. You all know about the clinical commissioning groups, led by clinicians elected by their peers, and all GP practices have to be members of a CCG. Unlike GP fund holding, which some of you may remember, this one's not optional. NHS England authorised all the clinical commissioning groups, some of them with a conditional autonomy, with limits on their freedom to practice. And they spend the bulk of the budget. They spend £60 billion a year, and they focus on rising demand, value for money, quality, value for money, performance variation, value for money, succeeding as relatively new organisations, and of course, our good old friend, value for money. What are the other change drivers that are going on now? I know that Nigel's going to talk to some of these much more eruditely and with greater insight than I can. But there are a few, they're important. The Better Care Fund, which cynics call the Pothole Care Fund because it's accurately ring-fenced, but that's a £2 billion annual transfer from the NHS budget going into social care. And that started work in April. Then, as you know, some of the public health responsibilities that used to sit in primary care trusts, those have shifted to health and wellbeing boards in local government. And it remains to be seen how effective the health and wellbeing boards are going to be in practice. They have the right to review the commissioning plans of the clinical commissioning groups. NHS England had a big review of the strategy and delivered their own plan, which is frequently referred to by Jeremy Hunt and David Cameron as the NHS's own plan for itself. The 5-year forward view was published in autumn of last year. I'm sure you've read it. If you haven't, you should have done. Then there was the Francis effect. Robert Francis chaired both the original and then the public inquiries into the tragic events at Mid Staffordshire Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust, in which numerous patients were very seriously harmed and given abusive and neglectful care. And when he published his report a few years ago. Essentially, that led to provider trusts being very, very strongly pushed to up their nursing workforce and therefore their cost base, with no extra money being provided for this. One of the things you'll have heard about recently is that the NHS proposes to cap what it spends on agency staff. Much of the recruitment to address the France's workforce shortage has come from staff agencies, so it's going to be very interesting to watch how that one plays out. Then Sir David Dalton, who's the chief executive of one of the highest performing provider trusts, Salford Royal, did a major review looking at the idea of hospital chains or hospital networks, and Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt announced last week at the NHS Confederation's conference that they're going to go ahead with a competition, as he described it. So they will be looking for 4 foundation trusts to put their hands up and say, we would like to take over the world. So keep your eye for that. That will be happening later in the year. And the major think tanks, the King's Fund and the Nuffield Trust, have looked at what lies ahead for the finances this Parliament, and their reviews of the finances could at best be described as gloomy, saying that if we are looking at effectively flat real terms funding for the NHS till 2020, describing a gap of about £30 billion between what the NHS, as I say, would have had with a normally functioning economy and is in fact going to have where we are today. You will have seen variants on this slide, and I know Nigel will talk to something like this, but what this roughly demonstrates is the amount of productivity and efficiency gain the NHS needs to make. And this really is unprecedented in any developed world health system. Developed world health systems have certainly done cuts. If you went to the health systems of Spain, or Portugal, or Italy, or Greece, they have cut things. But making efficiency gains while delivering the same amount of care, which is what's being described, is going to be a very interesting and exciting challenge. £30 billion is a lot of money by anyone's standards. It's more than Simon Stevens gets paid. Total NHS budget, in context, every year is 116 billion. And the 5-year forward view put a bid in to government. It said, actually, we are going to need some more money for the NHS. And they said, we think if you can give us 8 billion more by 2020, so that's really late in the Parliament to be showing results, we think we can find £22 billion worth of productivity and efficiency gains. So that's more than the Nicholson challenge, and that's probably going to be very interesting to see whether you can hold staff wages frozen effectively for a decade. I think that might be quite challenging, particularly if the economic recovery continues unabated. The other bits of the 5-year forward view, they think that redesigning care provision models, so there's vanguard multi-specialty community providers, primary and acute care systems, and now acute hospitals are being asked to look at how they'll change the way they work. Getting serious about prevention, Simon Stevens hot as mustard on making us less fat and more healthy, so that's something that they want to care about. Mentioned capping agency pay rates, they're going to ban management consultancy. And this is quite amusing given the fact that whenever NHS providers have got into trouble, one of the first things that Monitor, which is the economic regulator of the NHS, has done, has been to say, right, you now need to appoint Ernst & Young or McKinsey's or KPMG, and that's not something you have an option about, chaps, because Monitor is largely staffed by former management consultants, and they like talking to people who speak the same language as them. And the government's committed to funding 5-year forward view, £8 billion, but I think most people would agree that the Nicholson challenge has kind of harvested most of the low-hanging fruit of the pay freeze and of cutting the tariff. Many of you may have seen that actually when they brought out the proposed new tariff for this financial year, 15-16, the provider sector, who are consulted on this, turned around and by a very significant majority just went, no, can't do it. Not going to be safe. We cannot do it on a continually cut amount of money to produce services. Which is quite a seismic moment. I think, obviously the trade press, such as Health Service Journal, where I do some work, picked it up in considerable. I don't think the Nationals really quite got the importance of that. But hope that you will do. That is a seismic moment. So there was a bit of a fudge around the tariff, and now effectively the specialised hospitals who do a lot of specialised commissioning work, so that's the big teaching hospitals and the tertiary hospitals, are effectively holding out, and they're saying, no, we'll have to carry on using the old tariff, and everybody else has agreed to a slight enhancement in a couple of areas. So there we are. I hope that's really cheered you up in a big way. I can see your faces beginning to lift and shine, and it's all just fine. So hands up who's really confident about how well this is going. Oh, okay, fine. So how are we going to deal with this? What are we going to do to cope during this period? Well, I suppose one option is to Xerox off this sign and stick it outside every NHS provider building. Though I hope we're not going to go down that route. So I'm going to finish this little ramble by saying, as I would say anyway, but it's got to be more important than ever for you all to be really keeping up to date with what's happening in the NHS.